Hello and welcome to Finding Your Atom YouTube podcast series. We are here again and in an excitement of trying to portray what is the atom and the smallest unit of each of us. So I'm here again with my partner in crime, Amrita Sen, and excited about talking about a lot of the things that makes us special. And I think one of the things we've been talking is how can we find our dots, our inner atom identifier, a concept trademark of Amrita, and as well the atom particles that makes us who we are, or the equilibrium, the sustainable happiness, the polka dots, and as well how we deal with the inflammation of the body, the spirit, world peace, and learning from world peace failures, which I think it's a very big concept, but it's critically important. So today we have our special guest, Katey Lockwood, and we're going to be talking about her experience as a global coach of very high-profile personalities. We're not mentioning names, but I can tell that they're very big. But it's about how she finds her own oneness and their own equilibrium in the middle of this chaos that we all live, but as well about beautiful things that we all live. So Katey is the author of the book, or co-author of the book, The Way, that she wrote with Vernon Sankey. And I'll just start with a quote, and then I'll kick off with Amrita that has a very clear agenda for today. We're going to try to go from the theory to the practice, but I think it's really important to look at these things. And I'll start with a quote that is actually the entrance of the book, but I think it's quite beautiful for what we're talking here. The mind can go in 1,000 directions, but on this beautiful path, I walk in peace. It is my conviction that there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. This is from Thich Nhat Hanh. I didn't spell it right, but it's a beautiful concept, that the idea of we go in 1,000 directions. And I'll pass the word to you, Amrita. I know that you have a very clear agenda, and I think it's a very powerful one. So let's go with this.
Thank you, Dinis and Katey. Thanks again for coming back to the show. We covered some amazing top-level semi-theoretical concepts in our last talk with you, talking about finding uniqueness, finding some sort of balance, and all the different broad problems and solutions you see among clients. I thought what might be interesting for our listeners today is to the extent that you, not without getting into specifics, let's talk about real world examples, very typical things that you've seen in your career, and areas where people misinterpret what you are saying. So, and the reason I ask about misinterpretation is we talk a lot about the general. We talk a lot about, okay, let's find the thing that makes you happy, find the very one thing and do the work and do, but it's very easy to get lost in it's very easy to miss details on how that's done, right? And the better way to think about details is to learn through stories, right? So what I wanted to open this up to is, can you share some very practical stories with us today, one or two, which allows us to get into the guts of your philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
start with any number of topics, whether it's rest or inflammation, however you want to do it.
Okay, well, I think it's important. Also, I just want to say thank you so much for having me back on. It was so delightful to have the conversation last time. So thank you, I really appreciate that. And also to your viewers. In respect to experiences, I think I've worked with many different profiles of people, and I think this sort of overall experience is trying to balance. I keep saying that word balance because we're so, we've got such busy lives that trying to balance all those interpersonal relationships with work, with our leisure, with our me time, our self-care, and it's very difficult to find that right balance. And often what we do is we focus on one thing, and it might be work, and when we're focused on the one thing, unfortunately other things sort of kind of don't get the same energy to it, and they often fail because we're not able to balance, our time and our value in the right way. So I have quite a multitude of different objectives and different experiences, but it's interesting to see. Something that keeps coming up at the moment is people in sports. They're trying to find focus in what they do whilst having time for themselves, whilst having time with their families, and also nurturing their relationships. And they're finding that quite difficult because obviously when you're focused on something which is performance related, you have to give a lot of time and effort to that. And what it does end up being is quite consuming to that person, because you want to make sure you're the best at all times. And how that correlates in your life can be through nutrition, through self-care. And this, I think we're going to talk about that, but rest and self-care is really important actually, because for instance, I'll just take a footballer who I'm working with at the moment, and he struggles to sleep. He's in this constant sort of anxiety stress mode because he's performing a lot, and then he has this when he's performing and he comes back to the rest point, he finds it really hard to switch off. So he's still in that, I should have done this, I intercepted the ball in this way, he's constantly going over his play rather than thinking, well, this is my time to rest. And then also, obviously, with the family environment and his personal relationships, he's also got to manage those appropriately. And sometimes, not taking that home as well. And that's the difficulty as well. You might have had a really bad game or a really bad meeting or whatever that is. Not to bring that home is another key skill. So you're not taking that out on family members or, because other people, we're all energy. So other people are going to pick up on that energy. It's really important to say, okay, well, that was my focus there. When I'm at home, I'm present with who I am at home. And that's maybe a father, or that's maybe a husband or a partner. And it's really important to know and to acknowledge that I'm this when I need to be, and when I need to be present in my life of giving to others, whether that's in my relationship, I am that too. Because that's, you have to nurture that. So there's a lot of understanding, but also how do we de-stress from that? How do I actually change my focus and recognize that I might be feeling burnt out or stressed out in that environment? Therefore, how can I say to myself, right, I can recognize it, I feel it, I can feel it in my body, I can feel it in my mind, I can feel that my thoughts are all over the place. How can I, and this is where we have to take accountability, to say, how can I do something about this now? It might just be like, I need to take 20 minutes out for a walk in nature. I need to take 20 minutes out to have a bath, to relax, to have a little, meditation, whatever it is, for you to come back to yourself and to be present, so that you're not taking that energy, your workspace, into your home, and just to acknowledge that, okay, I feel like I'm giving so much to my work, I need to have some time to myself. And that's okay. That's not a problem to have time to yourself. We've devoted so much to this needing to fulfill something, but we also need to recognize it in ourselves, to say, look, this is my time now for my own rest. And then I have restorative work is really important, particularly for someone who's an athlete, because the cells are always restoring. And if they don't restore, actually, that's when they end up injured, because they're not able to restore appropriately and they end up just burning out.
A couple concepts here. What do you find are the tactical differences between somebody who knows, a sportswoman who knows how to get sleep, and a sportswoman who knows how not to get sleep? What's the key difference between those two profiles? Sleep meaning restorative, meaning rest. I'll use that.
Yeah. We become habitual in our thinking. So what happens if somebody is used to being very busy, whether it's busy physically or busy work-wise, that becomes a habitual pattern. So if you're continuously being busy mindset, busy physically, a client who struggles to switch off is because most of the time they don't have the tools. So they're just used to being in that mindset. And actually you can see it in the way that they are, because you can see that they're almost looking for things to do. They don't feel comfortable not doing anything. So, and a client who understands the need for restorative care or for rest is someone who can actually say, I understand that I've got to rest because it's good for my body. And it's really just sort of tapping into how your body is feeling. You know, we don't really, we're not aware of our own body, which is really strange. But most people are just so used to just doing things all the time that their awareness only comes when there's a problem. And now we're now in a place where we're having to restore it from a point of finding a solution around it rather than preventative care, because we've got to a point now where we're just so burnt out and we're physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, emotionally exhausted, and now we're then trying to pedal back to trying to get back into our well-being state. Whereas if we're doing it on a constant basis, then we're restoring all the time. So we're acknowledging that this is a need. So we're not going to get to the point where we're so burnt out that we end up in a problematic way because we've got disease within the body somewhere. It's that's how this works. The mind is so intrinsically linked that we've listened to that before. We've recognized this we need to do before it gets to that state. It's really important. It's so important to really be tapped into your physical body.
So one question on that. So as someone that, does a lot of stuff, and as well as to go through a lot of these things and as well managing people. So one of the things I'm trying to do is, like you said, is having space, first of all, for myself. So a bit of oneness, whatever we call it. But I think one of the questions practical coming to what Amrita said is, so let's say in my case, I'm a CEO, I'm an author and do a lot of stuff like Amrita and most of us here. I try to have this personal balance, but sometimes it's very difficult when you want to achieve a particular goal and you have to deal with people that have completely different personalities and you actually get frustrated and sometimes you lose your temper, probably in my case. And as well, you have to deal with a lot of challenges or even different velocities, different perception, different cultures. So when you talk about people with high productivity, but for instance, I have people much less productive than me that have much more stress than me. So how do you see this measure of stress? And I think that happens a lot in my teams where I have people that have fantastic capacity of work, but they get stressed with the most small things, and then they get blocks in the stress. Yeah. And so the idea here is the process. I think the process, like you said, to stop, to think, but as well to create like a ritual that creates this. And I'd like to see some of the advice that you give, because of course you're dealing with people that are high performers, both actors, sports people, and other personalities. And of course, these people have a lot of as well self-confidence, because if you go in front of an audience, or if you go in front of a film, or in front of thousands of people listening to you or seeing you playing a game or stuff like that, the degree of pressure is massive, both personal and even collective. So I would like to hear some nuances and some practical things that you suggest to these people that you can share with us.
Yeah, I think when you have a lot, and when your nature is to be productive, right? So you want to obviously to be the best that you can be, and that's our nature, is to always want to succeed and to be the best version of self and to be able to achieve what we can, but you have to also realize that how when it's so self-orientated like that, I work with actors and actresses, and they say the same thing as well, and they actually don't know who they are because they've worn all these different masks, you know, and they're also sort of playing all these different characters, that they've lost who they are, you know. So I think it's really important to understand that, one, it's okay to say I need time out, to recognize when you do, that's okay, but also how we communicate within our relationships, whether it's our relationships at work, so that you don't have, I mean, we're trying to manage stress in the best way possible. And when we are able to have communication where we feel that we are heard, we're not dismissed, you know, we feel like we're being productive in our communication, we collaborate differently. If we are coming from a point of, you know, I'm right, you're wrong, this isn't being done, it's not productive. And actually it just makes the situation worse. So when we come from a point of, this is what I always say about conscious communication, because when you're in a present state of communication and you are actively listening, that's really important as well, to actively listen to somebody else's point of view, or so you're not always trying to sort of put in your own perspective without seeing somebody else's. That's another, and it's almost like you're meditating whilst you're speaking, because you're consciously listening to what they're saying. Therefore, you're getting the best out of that person. You know, if we're just sort of firing these things at this person, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, they're stressed out, they don't really know what they're doing, they're not really giving you what you're communicating, because there's a lack of understanding somewhere, you're never going to be producing the best environment or the best work. So to be really present and to listen to what they're saying, really listen to what they're saying, because we often see the world through different perspectives. So when we're able to say, okay, well, that's your perspective, okay, maybe their strength is something different to what I'm acknowledging, and therefore we can maybe challenge it in a different way. You've now come up with a completely different outcome. But this is what I worked with a tennis player who was very reactive, and it was almost, you could see it when he was playing. So he'd have a bad shot and he's very reactive. You can see him almost in his next play, he's still reacting on the previous play because he's annoyed that he didn't get the right shot. Now he was then doing meditation, and the change, he almost danced with it, because the change was, he was in flow with the play. He wasn't reactive anymore. So therefore the shot didn't have the same effect on him to play the next shot. And it was like a different player, and he won that match. So, you know, this is where you see the difference. When you're reactive and you're coming from a place of reactivity, you're pushing against something. When you don't, when you're flowing with it, you're listening, you're using all your senses to actually guide through it, the outcome is completely different. But it all comes from a place, it's a state of mind. That's what we're trying to achieve. Because when you're less reactive, you know, if you're having a communication with someone that you're working with, and you are in a reactionary state, and your outcome is, I want this from this person, and this person's saying, well, that's not what I see. You know, you're already, your reaction is reactive. It's not pro outcome. It's not producing something that's positive. So when we look at it from a perspective of, you know, I need to be less reactive, but I also need to listen, or I need to communicate. I need to understand myself in that situation.
Yeah, this is serious, beautiful stuff, and I think important. Go, Amrita.
So, you know, not bringing the reactiveness, not bringing the stress, not bringing the, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming concept from work to home, right? Work, you gotta be forceful, and you have to be forward thinking, and it's a growth oriented mentality. That growth oriented mentality doesn't change when you go home. It's just very different. How would you recommend people do that when they're working from home during the pandemic? Your office is right there and your house is right
Yeah. Oh, this is what people are experiencing as well. You know, this is,
what do you recommend
with,
to people?
because we're so connected, we've become very technically connected and less connected to self, and that causes its own issues. You know, I'm seeing this happen quite a lot, and actually it's very unhealthy, and we almost feel guilty if we're not being, not responding all the time, if we're not giving, you know, 24 hours of our lives to work or whatever it is. And we're just saying how accessible everything is now. So, you know, whether you've got your phone by your bed, and you feel like 24/7 you've got to respond to work or friends or whatever it is, you know, because everything is quick, everything is, we want an answer now, or, you know, we almost feel like we are attached to this. But it's again, you've got to be careful here, because that's another, almost like an addiction really, that we are creating for ourselves. You know, and people keep saying this to me. They say, oh God, I almost feel like I need 24 hours out of every technology, everything. I just need to zone out. I mean, they've got things like these silent retreats now. And so many people, especially in like CEOs, they're all going on these silent retreats. They're needing to, because they are so stuck in this world of accessibility that they can't switch off.
But what if somebody legitimately fears that if they don't respond in an appropriate amount of time, they'll lose their job?
Exactly.
That fear is quite real.
It is real. It is real. And this is where we've all got to take accountability for that, because not only are the businesses having to take accountability, you know, they have to say, actually, I mean, I sometimes see in emails and they say, you know, you don't need to respond because we don't expect you to respond. And that's actually quite nice to receive that, because they've actually acknowledged this is out of work hours. So, you know, we're not expecting you to respond. But, you know, at the same time, I'm seeing people who are feeling that fear and anxiety almost. It's an anxiety to think, I've got to respond to this. And if I don't, maybe I'm missing something. Or, you know, maybe I'm not going to be good enough for this because they're going to go to someone else. Or, you know, we feel like our responsibility is that we have to react straight away. But you have to be aware of this, and this is part of it. Because if we're constantly attached to our technology, if the phone is there, or it is another addiction, and that is not helpful. And if I take away, you know, I have clients, if I was to take away their phone, for instance, you know, I don't think they would know what to do because they've become so reliant on this thing. I mean, if we think so many years ago, we didn't even have this. Now it's all connected to everything else. I had a call the other day actually, and I had my daughter at home, and that was in the lockdown. Yes. And my daughter's trying to speak to me, and I'm trying to do this, you know, Zoom call. You say, oh my goodness, it's just overwhelming because you're just trying to do too many things at the same time. Yeah. But also, it's okay. We're human. It's okay. You know, we've got to acknowledge that.
But actually, it's interesting you bring up the daughter thing, because I have two boys, as Dinis knows. Oftentimes, you know, running businesses, family, husband, one device that's really helped me throughout the years, and maybe this is something that helps other people, is when your kid looks at you and says, I need your time, you have to look at it like a privilege.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of a privilege to receive someone's yearning. So the device that I've used is, if it's coming from someone's yearning, it gets your attention. If it's coming from someone's ego, it may have to take a number. Ego is necessary in business, but it may have to take second place to the yearning. Because yearning is energy pulling, and it needs your energy. And it's allowed me to prioritize what needs to happen exactly at that moment. I don't know if that you think that's
people. It's absolutely true. But and also to say, to be present with your children. You know, how often do we spend we're spending time with our children, but our mind is elsewhere. We're thinking, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. We're not present with them. So it's no wonder they're sort of looking at us, sort of, you're going, you know, we are, at the end of the day, we are their teachers. You know, we are their role models. That's a huge responsibility. If we're sort of sitting there saying, sorry, I don't have time because I'm on my phone, what are we teaching them? What are we showing them?
Yeah.
We're showing them that.
Up from somebody who, Dinis, did you do the thumbs up? Who was that person?
No.
Was that you, Dinis?
No, not now.
No, okay. Because I said yearning, and then I just saw one of these.
No. I think no, my hands. No, but I think this is a very important thing. It's kind of, and the one thing I want to put another element here is I've been thinking a lot about this, is that we're becoming completely cybernautic. It's kind of in some ways we're becoming already some kind of cyber, because in the end of the day we have always a device with us, or a computer or a phone, and now even the watches and everything else is sensors and stuff like that. But like you said, Katey, is kind of the example we give to our children, but as well, how they're going to cope with this. Because
Exactly.
at least probably the three of us still at a time where there was not a lot of phones, at least when we were children. But I think here is how we're going to be taking to the next level. I think my question right now is, coming back to what you said, Katey, is that if you want to stop like a big personality, and even someone like me, I sometimes make an exercise. We were talking before with our friend producer that sleeping with the phone or trying to do it. I've been trying, to be honest. I leave it at least not close to the bed, but a bit far. But it's very difficult because in one end, the phone is as well a kind of a friend. So it's kind of the technology right now is kind of as well a way for us to protect ourselves. And I think this comes to the concept of metaverse that I've been writing about. And metaverse is no longer just the VR experience. Actually, the VR experience is not metaverse. It's these singularity moments that we have. So my question is, and this is actually for both of you, because I'm particularly interested to discuss this, is this is going to be just accelerate. It's just going to be acceleration. We're going to have more and more. And actually, at the moment, I'm actually creating a metaverse public company. But one of the things that I'm finding is the challenge of, first of all, the direction of how to cope with this. Because there's no rules. This is kind of a new kind of out of the box. Let's say me and Amrita have been talking about Buddha, about Gengis Khan, but this is kind of our generation, and our children's generation is going to be tenfolder. So how do we cope with this? I think for both of you, because this is quite an interesting point, and this is going to be having, if we use it right, is it great for our balance? If not, it's a disaster for us, all of us.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, this is what I'm seeing, especially in our new generation. You know, it's blurred. The lines it's quite blurred right now with artificial intelligence. That, you know, sort of distortion between virtual reality and the real reality is becoming more and more kind of amalgamated. So I think you know, I'm seeing children addicted to computer games, you know, and again, that's a distorted reality. Because they are, again, addicted to something that's not real, and it's something we have to be really conscious and aware of, because if we aren't addressing this now, this is the generation that is going to come and be our leaders at some point. And if their interpersonal relationships have disconnected as a result of being so immersed in this sort of virtual reality, then, you know, that's a concerning future, isn't it?
Well, it cease to become human.
Yeah.
You cease to be human, and you look at human beings as data pieces, which is, you know, which could lead to war.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've covered enough ground on Genghis Khan, Dinis, to know that when a leader stops thinking about the well-being of their tribe and then looks at people as assets and part of an overall data empire, you create a lot of war.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe, you know, there's another concept here, which is maybe war is a natural human way of being. As human beings naturally lead to consolidation of brain power, consolidation of things, which leads to war, and a better mousetrap comes along, which leads to more war. Maybe that's where we are. Or maybe there's a path here where there's enough thought and enough scientific thinking around the human brain that we can finally break the cycle of warfare, whether it's digital warfare, economic warfare, physical warfare. We finally have an opportunity as humankind, and this is where we get into our world peace theme, Dinis, is we finally have an opportunity in the next 1,000 years to break the cycle of consolidation of power, leads to empire building, leads to human suffering, leads to a better mousetrap, leads to more empire building. You know, is there an end to it? You don't know.
Yeah,
right?
That's so interesting, because I actually think we are at that point actually where we could go one way or the other. Yes. And I think it's quite interesting to exactly the point you've just raised.
You, by seeing all these people in their extreme digital connectiveness and their sense of fear, you're seeing that maybe the world is collapsing because all this stuff is happening around the pandemic and people being completely stressed to the max. But you, in your position, you're also seeing, but I see that all of this can actually turn on its head.
Yeah. Sometimes, sometimes something's got to fall in order for something new to emerge. So, you know, and that's what we're seeing. It's quite interesting, really, because we're seeing all these different multi-layers of this turning point right now. And it's interesting because you're seeing, it's almost like, you know, Shakespeare said the world is a stage, right? So we're seeing all these people standing on their stage and standing for what they believe to be truth or what is right for them. And, you know, and I think we've got to make those conscious decisions for ourselves. You know, we're seeing this, as you said, this huge growth in artificial intelligence. And we have to take our own responsibility to work out what is right and what's not right, what's healthy and what's not healthy for us. If we are just unconsciously scrolling through Instagram, you know, we're just sort of going through lots and lots of content that doesn't really mean anything, we're not using our time of value, then is that actually helping? If we're comparing ourselves, and this is the thing of generations now, all these children are comparing themselves to these filtered people on Instagram, you know, because they're trying to strive for this idea of perfection, or whatever perfection is, you know. So again, that's very toxic. That's very toxic to ourselves. So if we're being authentic, if we're being, you know, just truthful to who we really are, we're not having to pretend to be something else in order to be liked or to be, you know, that's where we have to stand, you know. And just to identify, if we see children, I hear parents, they're asking me to work with their children because their children are sitting in there, they come back from school, they sit in their rooms all day and they're playing on their PlayStations, whatever, and they don't even see them. And there's lack of connection between them. And that's a really sad environment, because we won't get those years back. And those years are really precious. And as I said, you know, we are teaching them all the time, and children like sponges. If we teach them that it's okay to be disconnected, and then that's what they will be. But it's not healthy. It's really not healthy for them. You know, we've lost the days actually where we used to go out and play outside with our friends, you know, and come back for dinner and sit around our table with our family and actually talk about our days. And we've lost those because we're so busy with things that we don't have the same, it's just not the same environment anymore. But
in your line of work, Katey, when you become this, you know, 2022 version of human being, right? From the days of the prairie and family dinners and playing outside to now this modern version of what the nuclear family is. Do you see that leads to any sort of outsized suffering, or do you think people just now adjust to this new thing and become whatever they are? Because the only thing it does measurable, right, is the suffering. That's the only thing.
I think it is creating suffering. but the suffering comes from the lack of awareness. You know, we don't have to be on our phones all the time. We don't have to be posting pictures of ourselves. We don't have to do those things. So
well, I'll ask a different question though. I'll ask
yeah.
you a question, which is, do you think the family of today, the nuclear family of today, because of this lack of physical connectivity, is a family that suffers more than a family 30 years ago?
There's been a lot of research around this, actually, because they say that people are happiest when they don't have as much as what, you know, in the Western world we have, because we're always trying to get something else. There's always something else, like the never-ending carrot, isn't it? So it's difficult to, I don't want to sort of, you know, put anything in a box, but, you know, you can, I mean, I've been to some amazing places like India, and you see such happiness from very little that they have, you know, because they're very connected spiritually. Maybe that's something that they feel that is their inner richness, you know. So
Dinis, do you think the world is a less happy place now than it's ever been?
Well, it's interesting because I wanted to step in a bit on this, but I think you are going in a great direction. So statistically, we're actually better than ever. I think talking about statistics, okay, that even with all the technology, and actually there was a moment you mentioned is, I actually think all this technology is actually creating wonderful things. Okay, of course, you have to see that if you look at history, of course, we tend to look at history models based on like the most successful historic moments, but we don't look at mainstream topics and times. Okay, of course, there's the life extension. There's a lot of moments. Of course, there were really moments in the past where some communities were living very well. Exactly, but then there was the brutality and the violence, and actually, for instance, you mentioned people being slaves. That is until the 20th century was kind of completely normal, and even during the 20th century, if you look at some societies, you still have a lot of class society systems. But I think coming to what makes happiness or not making us, that comes to your initial question, Amrita, and what you said as well, Katey, is that is, I think, it never changed in history of humanity, is being well with yourself and managing that. I think right now is this environment that we are dealing with, all this technology, and of course it's just going to accelerate. It's going to accelerate a bit of Homo machine, or the Homo Deus of Harari. But I think what is important right now is, are we going to, and I think that's, for me, I wrote recently an article about how can we rewrite this moment in history in a narrative that is positive, or at least more pragmatic and non-dystopian. Because if you go on the dystopian narrative, that is, like you said, Gengis Khan was there, and he was actually a genius in his crazy ways. But I think the point here is I believe that we have more power than ever right now. And I think the only thing that is kind of more dystopian, and that part, it's more a question for you, is how do we deal with this? I think all these technologies are making us very self-centered. And we have a sense of very small sense of community, or then we have a sense of community digital, which is not the same as face-to-face. And I think that's kind of, I think it comes back to the question of how we can actually go to create our practice without losing the sense of being part of a tribe. Because of course, being a digital tribe, first, at a certain point, I tried to really be completely digital just as an experiment. And it doesn't work, even with the teams, okay? If you need to meet people face to face, especially if you want to build, of course I have partners that I hardly saw in my life because of COVID, at least in the last 2-3 years. But still, to build a next step relationship, you have to meet the people face to face, see the body language, all these different things.
Digitally connected as you and I are, and we met through Zoom. It wasn't until we met in London that we decided, you know what, however long it takes, we're going to talk about things.
Exactly.
And we had a schedule. Right after that, we both shook hands and had a schedule, and we said, whatever it is, we're going to have something where we talk to people. It's a face-to-face that really made the difference.
And I think this is really important. I think, and I think it's going to be more important. I think, especially your book, Katey, with Vernon. I think it touches, and I think to wrap up today, because we're passing the time. So one of the things that you have in your book is the 7 key learnings, and as well the concept of oneness. So can you talk about these 2 topics? I think it's more theoretical, but it touches very practicalities that day to day.
About the subject of oneness, particularly.
Yeah, so the 7 key learnings, and as well the oneness, with two questions, sorry, on that level. Yeah.
Well, talk about oneness. Oneness is quite a broad subject, which is it takes quite a while to understand the concept of it. But oneness with ourselves is really important. So the mind, body, soul, emotional connection. So we can recognize that if there is something that's coming up that we're feeling very stressed about, whether we're experiencing toxicity, we have to understand where the mind is so intrinsically linked to everything else. So, everything all is mind, we say, so everything starts in the mind. But also in terms of what we're seeing right now on a global scale is really interesting. In the fact of, again, what we're seeing on the global stage, there are so many different opinions of what's happening right now. So oneness is really, really important. We are all connected, right? So one person can have an opinion which might not be the same opinion as me, but we have to respect that person's opinion. We can't just demonize them because they've got a different opinion to us. And that's really interesting, because we are, we're seeing it, say, with Novak. We're seeing it, in lots of different categories. Actually, it's really interesting, but we have to see it from the perspective of others, and that's oneness. If we're just seeing it, if we are in separation with ourselves, when we're not connected to who we are, that's mostly when we might have narcissistic traits. We aren't in oneness, we're in separation. That's acting in the ego. That means I'm right, you're wrong. I can't see through your perception. I'm not interested in your perception. All I'm interested is making sure that I'm right. And that's toxic, because that's not how, from a perspective of oneness, you're definitely not on that same level. So when we're seeing everything that's happening right now, coming from the perspective of oneness, to say, okay, that's fine that you have that perspective, might not be my belief system, but that's okay. And there's normally learning in that. There's normally something we can learn from the person who might have a polar opposite to what my idea of what is right. So oneness really comes from even to experience. I've studied a lot of Da Vinci's drawings. He speaks about oneness a lot, actually, and actually symbolizes it in his drawings. So he's the symbolism of the connection of the human anatomy is actually linked to nature. So it's the same in nature. So if we aren't respectful of nature, which is part of us, and the ecosystem, we aren't in oneness either. So that's why I say it's a very broad subject, but when you see through the perspective of oneness, that somebody else can have an opinion which is polar opposite to yours, you can learn something from that experience. You're not attacking that person. It doesn't come from a separation or ego. So it is, as I said, this is a different way of thinking, but the more that you can come into this way of thinking, you deal with things so much of a higher vibration. We're talking about finding your atom. It really is, you deal with things in a completely different vibration, and you're not as, it's not toxic, it's just dealt with consciously. So all those 7 steps about attachment, they're all talking about all the different, we call them natural laws, actually, because these laws were taught by Einstein. They were taught by most of the great thought leaders. And that's why when we are experiencing challenges or turbulent times within personal relationships or economically, globally, these are really important to understand. They always come up during human, very poignant parts of human history. So, it's hard for me just to kind of go into them bit by bit because they're very broad. Obviously, we've written a book about them, so they're very broad concepts, but they're concepts that once you master, and we talk about self-mastery, because this is about mastering yourself or self-realization, because this is the point of really understanding who you are being in this world. And that's, once you've understood that, that's an evolved human consciousness.
And Dinis, to wrap up, I know we're almost out of time. That leads us to, the world peace thing that you and I are trying to make sure people talk about in these podcasts. So that may be the thing we talk about in our next episode with Katey.
I'd love that.
But I really love this concept of oneness, because it talks about all those basic human traits, the reciprocity, the empathy, the putting yourself in someone else's shoes, not thinking about the other person, all those religious things that have been doctrines of both religion and positive thought in humanity, is put yourself in someone's shoes.
Yeah, so exactly.
So with that, Dinis, what would you recommend we come away with this in terms of, practical solutions dealing with all of past experience?
No, completely. This is wonderful. Thank you so much. So I think I love the principle. For me, is very precious, self-mastery, because it's something that I've been actually what I feel personally and very personally is that when I try to be a better version of myself, not because of pleasing anyone, but because of trying to be who I am, and as well, of course, in a balanced way, like you said, Katey and Amrita, normally I feel very good. Because I never care much about what people say about me, and that I'm quite unique. But I think in the sense of the self-mastery, I think is something that I think probably would summarize everything we're talking here. Because it's this self-mastery. If we really master, for instance, in the case of Katey, you as a coach and as an author, in your case, Amrita, with all your multi-talents. But when we do this, we're really passionate about what we're doing. And I think that's partly what is the finding your atom that we've been talking here, is that really is what makes us special. If you stick with this, for instance, there's so much hate right now on social media and digital that sometimes is very crazy. For instance, right now I was seeing people that are obsessed about being hateful towards NFTs or towards something like this. And why are you even losing time on that? Try to, you don't like it, just use your energy for anything else. There's really some kind of pet hate for something. And just try to be better. And I think it's like I said, and I think this is really important, the self-mastery as the element of finding your atom. And I think probably we'll put this in our kind of experimental research that we do on this podcast, but I think it's really important. And I think once we focus on this, we are better people and actually feel better. At the end of the day, it's about that. So I think that's what I would take out of this. There's a lot of great things. We'll take notes for people listening to us. Please find Katey's not so much on social media, but we've been pushing her to be. But especially on the inspiration side, she's in improvemyworld.com that you're going to see is a great website. There's a lot of research there, there's a lot of videos, and we're putting all these links here. And me and Amrita, you'll continue finding us every week here, with some exceptions, talking with the most inspiring people in the world. Thank you so much, Katey. Thank you so much, Amrita.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.